Good morning. Well, welcome. First session of the AWS Public Sector Summit. Nothing like starting a day on procurement to dive right in. So what we're going to do today is, first of all, I'm David DeBrant. I'm with our Capture Business Development team, and my partner in crime here is...
Hey, I'm Anthony Kelly. I'm in the same team.
So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about procurement and talk about best practices around acquisition. And the way we've decided to do this is we can talk slides, we can talk about what talk about all the factors, but instead we're going to take the console and we're going to go into the console and actually walk through some elements of the AWS services and offerings and explain how procurement needs to be thought about with those actions within the console. And it's a little bit more of a visceral way of doing things. So how many of the folks in the room are government? Is anybody government? Okay. How many people are procurement? Okay. Procurement. Okay. And partners? Okay. So this is actually directed at both. The discussion is, for government, it's thinking about how you bring procurement in, or if you're in procurement, how you join up with the business teams to have this discussion and making sure you're part of the effort early. If you're a partner, it's understanding how to have this conversation in advance. Because what can happen is you can have all these great conversations around the business, but when it gets to the actual acquisition, there can be barriers that can pop up. And it's being able to have that conversation early. So I want to go into yesterday. Teresa Carlson spoke at an event we had with our government partners, government program partners. And she talked about meeting with Department of Justice here, FBI, DHS. And she said for the first time, security didn't even come up as an issue. And she was surprised by that. And she's basically said, people are coming to AWS now for security rather than being concerned about the security. The number one issue now is acquisition. And I've been blessed in this job to be able to go around the world. Jane is over here, watches me which country I'm in, which week. And I'm having these conversations around the world. And the same thing comes up. It's acquisition, how to acquire. And ultimately what it boils down to is this, is there are tremendous benefits to the cloud. There's the elasticity, the innovation, the low cost, and traditional procurement approaches. We watch government trying to buy the same way they bought for 30 years. When they try to do that, it reduces or eliminates those benefits. And so we want to work with procurement, we want to work with the acquisition teams to make sure government and the end users can access the full gamut and the full benefits of what the cloud provides. So that's sort of the bottom line of what we're going to do. So I've got a couple slides here. I think we've talked about this before, but culture and procurement, security, compliance, policy, and business use cases, how to use the cloud are the key things. And like I said earlier, everything is boiling down to procurement and how procurement operates. And so what we're going to talk about today with Anthony on the console is a couple of different areas. We're going to talk about access control and security. We're going to talk about encryption. We're going to talk about security credentials. We're going to talk about our compliance regime. We're going to talk about pricing and billing and spending and how each of these elements needs to be taken into the procurement approach as we go forward. So the other cool thing about today, I think, is, and this happened pretty last minute, but is we're going to keep our presentation pretty short. And we've got Liam Maxwell with us. Liam Maxwell is with the is a national technology advisor in the UK. Maybe the godfather of GCloud. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but GCloud is the cloud buying vehicle for all of the United Kingdom government. This is central government and local government. And I'm intimately aware of this. I've been involved in 4 or 5 bids of GCloud, know it very well. Really, I would say it is the leading procurement vehicle in the world right now for buying cloud. They've done a fantastic job of setting up a way for government to easily and quickly buy cloud. So he's going to come up and actually talk about real life cloud. We're talking a little bit theoretical and talking about that. So he's going to come up and talk about his experience over the last 4 or 5 years doing this. So we're going to give him the last 15 minutes of the presentation. Okay? All right.
So what we've done is just created an AWS account. So it is nothing complicated. I'm not a solutions architect. In order to just to give an example of of where the control lays between the cloud provider and the customer and how that fits into a procurement. And the first thing we look at is IAM. And this relates to access control. And IAM, this service is effectively the keys to your data center. So you can control using the users and groups who gets in and where they can go when it comes to your services. And what we've done here, just to illustrate, actually you can see from the front here, under security status, I've created this account again, it's very basic, and we have given advice as to the best practices and what you should do. I haven't activated multi-factor authentication on my root account. It should be it's sort of AWS access control 101 that you should do that. I haven't done it, and we will tell you that you should do it, but you have the control in order to do it. We don't control that for you. What we have done here, created users and groups. So if I just look at the users, I have an accounting user, and I have attached them to a policy, and this policy gives them certain access controls. They have full access to AWS budgets and to billing, but if you compare that with the admin user who has administrator access, they have full access to all resources. And you can dig into this and get into the real granular details of the different policies and how you can create the roles and policies here. But it's a good demonstration of the control that you have and the capabilities that a cloud provider should provide to you in order to get the right control to meet your governance standards.
Yeah, so from a procurement perspective, the word I always boil this down to is capability. We oftentimes see requirements in RFPs saying the cloud service provider must do this, must manage the IAM, must manage the access for me. The real way you want to think about it is the capability to provide an offering, or the capability to do this. And when you're writing a procurement and looking to buy this, you have to set up a way, you have to write the requirements in the RFP or the approach in the framework that you're asking for these capabilities. You're not actually telling the cloud provider to do it. Ultimately, this is the shared responsibility model that we have. So as a user, you're going to be managing that piece of it rather than asking the end provider. And much of government is very used to asking the provider of the infrastructure to do it for you. So it's a big shift in how the procurement works and how the procurement's written.
And digging even deeper into that, if I log into the other role that you saw, the accounting role, and if I go to EC2, you'll notice that I get a load of messages saying that I'm not authorized to actually even see a lot of what's going on, and I can try to launch an instance and I'll be able to select an instance, but then I'll get an error message saying that an error occurred. So it's again another good example of the roles and groups being set up to control what can be done, and I'll just log out and log in again to the admin one so we can show you an instance being launched. So sometimes in a procurement we'll get questions about data location, and it asks the cloud provider to control where the data is located. And as Dave said, the word capability comes into play here, as we give you the capability to keep data within a certain geographical region. And if we click here, we can see the different regions that we have, excluding, I believe, the China region and Gulf Cloud. And I can choose any of these because I'm an admin user, and I can just go over to Ireland. And I can just launch an instance here, and then I can launch an instance and I can start to store data in Ireland. That might be against your compliance policy. You may not, someone should not be doing this, but it's up to you as the customer to control this. We give you all the capabilities to do it. And I mean, we love the word capability in a procurement. We like to see hundreds of them, because if we don't meet a capability, then it's up to us to raise the bar. And then, that's how product roadmaps are formed, by getting capabilities that you don't have. But if you direct the cloud provider to do this, then it actually detracts from the benefits of the cloud. We give you that control and the capabilities so that you can do what you need to do, and we're hands off, and it's a self-service tool. So To continue on, if I launch an instance here, I'll just select a free one. And we think about another procurement issue, which might be encryption. Obviously, encryption is a big deal, and we encourage our customers to encrypt their data. We give customers the capability to encrypt their data. We don't do it for them. Looking here, I've added an EBS volume. And for EBS, it's as simple as clicking a button. Customer has to do it. We don't do it for them. There may be some instance where a customer may not want to encrypt their data. We understand that, so we let them do either. And it's I guess with the procurement, it's understanding where the responsibility lays.
The whole thing is a shift in responsibility around security. And don't think of it as AWS moving away from helping. It's actually AWS giving you the power and the control over the security. So ultimately, encryption, we run into these requirements that'll be buried in an RFP saying, you must ensure that all our data is encrypted, or the CSP must. And that's always a red flag because, hey, we want you to have the control of what you can encrypt. Don't ask us to take care of all that for you, because it makes more sense that you actually do have the controls. And you also have the control of the keys and where the keys are stored and all of the security around it that you can control and find the area you're comfortable doing it rather than pushing it on the CSP, sort of more in a traditional sense.
And because cloud's new, it's understandable that it's taken a while to get to that level of understanding as to who does what. Dave, I was telling you, I used to run a tiny data center, so I was in charge of buying the Dell servers and installing them and powering them up. So if I did that and then it came to the point where I had data on the server, I'm not going to contact Dell and say, okay, encrypt my data for me. I'm well aware of where the level of responsibility lies because that's been going on for 30 years, whatever. And eventually we're going to get there when it comes to cloud procurements, but it's understandable that moving from that one model to the next is taking a little time. If we look at security groups, this is a good example of what you shouldn't do, but what you can do. So I have the ability here to open up all inbound traffic from anywhere to my instance. You really shouldn't do this. Again, I'm not a solutions architect, but they will confirm that you shouldn't do this. And if I go to review and launch, we have built in best practices and monitoring tools to say, hey, what are you doing? This is open to the world. And you might have a developer who wants to test something. They might want to have an instance that opens up this traffic. That's fine, but 99.9% of cases, they're not going to want to do that. So we give you the guidance and the best practices. You have the control.
And, it's one of the things that, ensuring the responsibility of the security, it has to be looked at all layers as you're going through the procurement and the approach, and making sure that you understand where that responsibility model is. And so, as you're going through and developing a procurement or a procurement approach, security, procurement, legal, and the business need to be working together on all these pieces early in the process. Handing over late to one of the groups, traditional models tend to come into the procurement very, very quickly, into the RFP very quickly. And so doing that early and having that conversation early really saves a lot of energy later on when working with the actual CSPs or the partners who are bidding.
And it reinforces the need to have the IT folks who understand this better than anyone right at the heart of the procurement, as you said, because if you just try and shift the data center requirements that you have, then you're going to run into a lot of problems. We've had RFPs that talk about the size and the weight of the screws on the racks that are being used, and it's clearly just they've lifted and shifted the data center requirements. But if you understand the capabilities and the services and your IT folks are in at the heart of it, you're going to avoid those problems.
Sprinklers, floor heights, stickers on the machine.
So thinking about scalability and elasticity, you want flexibility. You want to be able to get the benefits of what you're using. So if you say, okay, we're using 10 servers in our data center at the moment, we want 10 of those identical servers in the cloud, it's not really using the cloud to get the benefit from it. An example here is I have just one basic instance running. But what I've done is I have set up an auto-scaling group. So what this means is that I can define parameters by which, if they're met, my instances can scale up and scale down again. So if I add a policy, as you can see here, I have set up one when it comes to CPU. Again, these are just representative numbers. So I can say add 2 instances when the CPU utilization is 80% of this instance. Also, I can add many different policies to say remove instances when X parameter is hit. So you have all the control you need to get, the sort of utilization capabilities of the cloud, and not say we just need 10 servers. Between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. you may need 2. You may need 10 during the day. If you set it up here to scale up and scale down, you'll get the full benefit of it.
And so in a procurement, there's 2 elements that come up around this. First is architecting using a cloud architecture approach. Oftentimes we want a pick list. Like I am buying routers from a list. And I can go in and pick and pull this off, and I can pick this one and pull it off, and I can pick this one and pull it off. In the cloud, you're operating in a really DevOps model. You're trying something, you're spinning something up, you may shift it over, you may have auto scaling like Anthony's talking about, where you start in the morning with 2 instances going, you move up to 10 and back to 2. And allow that architecture to be accessible in the cloud approach and the cloud buying approach, because oftentimes they're thinking about it as buying a set of hardware. I'm buying it one time and I'm pulling it off. And the procurement needs to be designed to allow this type of flexibility to be accessed and used. Again, if it's not accessible and it's just a pick list, what ends up happening, it ends up being less flexible. You lose the benefits of the cloud. You lose the benefits of auto scaling, of being able to test and experiment with different things as well. So if there's anything I can say about building a cloud procurement is flexibility around how you buy and how you utilize.
And it's not just scaling as well. As you can see, I'm stopping this instance. It takes a minute. So when I stop the instance, I'm going to get an option here to change the instance type. I have chosen the T2 Micro just because it was the free tier and this is a demo. But I can, once this stops, I can go to a dropdown and I can have access to all the different instance types. If you have said we just want these certain types of instances in your procurement, you're not going to have the availability to use a different instance type, which might better meet the workload that you have. As well, you'll see that once this stops, because I have the auto scaling group set up to have at least a minimum of 1 instance running, another instance will just kick in and start up automatically. It takes a minute though, so while you're talking about compliance, we'll just see that go.
Okay. So compliance, as this spins, compliance is another area. We're going to show our compliance page and the accreditations and certifications we have for compliance. So for procurement, one of the things that we run into, government agencies around the world love to bring in a compliance regime that they're either used to working with or even their own. I'll give you an example. In Latin America, there's something called ICRIA, and agencies love to bring ICRIA in. It's a wonderful accreditation for data centers, but it is not applicable to cloud. And so we're very clear about that. Why are you bringing a data center approach to a cloud, to buying cloud? And actually, then we take that and say, why don't you just compare what you have right now to the accreditations that we have in place? And oftentimes what we found, in fact, I remember a few years ago in Singapore, Singapore came in with this whole accreditation that they wanted us to meet. That was great. We actually looked under the covers at it. It was ISO 27001. That's what it was. And so those kinds of things can be thought about. And so, if you think about a cloud provider like AWS, we have millions of active customers. And we had to sit down and try to work through each and every accreditation certification module, our model would break. So ultimately, we have what we think are really the top line and the best accreditation certification modules out there, and sitting down and doing a comparison. It's ultimately looking at, will these provide me the security that I need for the requirements and the workloads that I'm putting up there? So again, that's early homework that needs to happen ahead of time rather than just relying on the traditional approach.
And just to go back to something I mentioned previously, as it took a while, if I go to change instance type, these are all of the instances that AWS have. So again, you want the flexibility to be able to use what we have here. I'll cancel that. And if I refresh the page, hopefully there's another instance. running, so the auto-scaling group.
Okay.
That worked. Also, going back to compliance, we do provide a service, AWS Artifact, that has a lot of these compliance reports available on the AWS portal. So you log in and there's a click-through NDA for each of these, and you can see there's FedRAMP, ISO, SOC, PCI, SOC reports. So we do as many of these as we can, we make available to customers as well.
And one minor thing I'll throw out that we do run into on a regular basis is to access some of these reports requires a non-disclosure agreement because there's sensitivity to these reports and we take security very clearly. And sometimes those NDAs can be issues during a procurement to actually have an NDA as part of a discussion with the government. So what I ask government people and partners, if you're talking to government, is understand that that's part of it and it is part of our security posture. So having that NDA is going to be part of, involved, and knowing that in advance rather than trying to figure out during a procurement. We have a procurement right now that we're doing internationally where that's a big issue, is understanding how they can look at this report and sign the NDA. It's a pretty simple thing, but it's something that needs to be taken care of in advance.
And just looking at what's new, Dave, did you want to talk about the new services?
Sure. So one of the other areas that we run into is traditionally buying hardware. We ran into vendors or governments like to have the list. If you want to add new things to the list, that's fine and great. There'll be some type of process to maybe potentially evaluate those new offerings to be added, or there's an administrative process to do this. And I think in a traditional hardware world, that was probably okay to add those pieces on and make sure they got vetted. With cloud, this is just looking at our announcements right here. We probably do 3 announcements of service upgrades or feature changes or potentially even new services a day. So cloud is changing incredibly quickly, incredibly fast. And to sit down and say, I'm going to evaluate cloud and the new service or new offer and a new feature upgrade each time one comes out, and I'm going to approve it, it slows down the access to what we're providing, what your end customer and the government needs. So those type of things is allow the cloud provider allow access to the full gamut of offerings that the cloud provider has got, and don't go through a process to evaluate each one, because it really just slows down the benefits and you miss the innovation or you're cut off from the innovation. The other thing that happens too is sometimes it's just a pick list in the beginning for a 6-month or a year, even a 2-year contract. Those are the services that are allowed under this contract. You can only add new ones at the next contract. All of a sudden you've cut yourself off. We've got one right now, I think it's a 3-year deal that they're looking to set up. They're going to cut themselves off from all new features and services for the next 3 years that AWS is doing. I mean, 3 years in cloud is really forever. It's just a tremendous difference what happens. So these are the type of things, the flexibility, we'll go back to that again, is allowing that to occur.
And again, it's self-service, so we don't push these upon you. I mean, a cool one here is Amazon Athena with the query service. It's a cool new service. It's now available in Europe. If you really wanted to use it in Europe, why would you restrict yourself from that option? Because all it is an option. It's self-service. You pick and choose what you want to use, and because it's all API driven, the sort of the who, what, where, and when is all recorded. You can set up your CloudTrail logs to know exactly what people are doing, and set up access control as well. But we don't force these upon you. It just gives you the option to use the services that you might need.
Yep. So we're going to have Liam come up and talk in just a second, but I just want to emphasize one thing. I go into meetings all the time and we have these conversations, and you can sit and have this conversation. You can show PowerPoint, look at documents, go back and forth on it. But there's something very visceral about actually sitting down and going through the console. So for partners and for business folks in government, as you're talking to people within your organization or talking to customers, sitting down and having at least these basics to walk through and understanding 4 or 5 or 6 of the procurement elements that are there can actually really speed up a conversation. People sort of at a gut level get it when they actually see it. That's at least my experience. I'll never forget sitting in a room with a lawyer who was absolutely resistant to all of it until we actually sat down and opened up the console and spent 15 minutes on the console walking through, and they went, oh, I get it now, I understand it. Because a lot of people, especially in the procurement and legal side, actually haven't seen it. and cloud can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So I think it's really important that you have this pitch, you understand this piece, and this is a tool that you can use. And this can be revised for different customers, but understanding how to do this and have this conversation can really help speed the process and help gain understanding. And that's what a lot of it is. It's just gaining understanding and gaining a comfort level as you go forward. So, okay, with that, we're gonna actually have Liam come up here now and talk. Liam is gonna actually talk about real experience working with building GCloud, the contract that we talked about, the framework. He's gonna talk about his experience doing that in the digital marketplace that's in place in the UK. So, Liam.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much. God, it's sort of a slightly biased side of the room. I always worry about that. You think people are, sitting next to the door for a reason. Thank you very much, David, and thank you for having me. The reason I was asked to come and talk to you was because changing procurement has been one of the massive changes we did in the UK. I was taken into the UK government in 2011, and we had, at that point, what I would call as the square of despair. There were 4 big things that were wrong. We had a massive legacy. We had a security system which wasn't built for modern computing. We had a huge capability issue because we had outsourced all of our skills and all of our staffing for 25 years into the private sector. And we had a procurement system that was built to work ideally for an IT program that was built in around 2005. So the only way you could buy tech in government was either you could create a project and run that project for everybody, for a department that was to deliver a specific thing. Let's just say to deliver a driving license, and the project to deliver the car license was on a different setup, and the project to go and deliver a passport delivery service was on a different setup. And so you would have these silos of work that were delivering specific functions, often tied to specific components of legislation. And that meant that you were replicating and duplicating all over the place. The same things were being done all over the place at once. And also, each of those solutions and services was a locked-in technical solution that was perfect for that one particular thing at that one particular time. And you couldn't change it. And so consequently, as you will know, working in a technology field, that's tremendously difficult because you want to be able to change things all the time. And the change control costs were what were actually driving our IT spend up. And however good or bad the deals we were doing, we were spending about 1% of the gross domestic product of our country on administrative IT in government, which is a lot of friction in an economy that was having a real need to get growth. And what we thought we could see was that the 3 things that we needed were innovation, speed, and the ability to grow capability. And all those 3 things came from a market which is the small business market. The small businesses, if you built and ran services the same way as a small business does, you could provide point solutions and smaller components of solutions that you could put together to deliver your bigger digital solutions. And so we wanted innovation, we wanted speed, we wanted companies to act like small businesses, and we created a framework called the GCloud, which helped us get over that problem. And you can see behind me the results of that, because not only was that a program to help make government more efficient and give government the capability to build the services it wanted, but it generated payroll tax and national insurance in a huge number of companies all the way around the country, creating jobs. And it meant that we started to create a diverse market of innovative companies that could work in the way that we wanted to work for them. And so from our point of view, it was not only a success in delivering better economic results, it also meant we could start to build the solutions we needed. And the way that we did that was create a framework, create a set of frameworks that allow people to buy the services as small components. The thing you've just seen is over-specification is one of the great problems in procurement, because you can specify things so much. And then guess what? Technology changes, not the next year. Technology changes that afternoon. and your procurement framework and your procurement structure and everything that you've put together is suddenly out of date. And there's lots and lots of different buzzwords that float around that. There's agile is one of the words which I find particularly troubling because it's really misused. But what you want is the ability for your framework to enable you to buy the things that you need to deliver the services you want to deliver. And the frameworks can't be built around the way that IT was meant to run in the old style Treasury Green Book, go out and completely outsource to somebody. And also, companies that you want to include need to join the framework or join and be able to procure because they're startups. And so the principal problem we found was that companies couldn't sell to government because it was too expensive. If you wanted to sell into a government, you had to fill in a procurement document, you had to fill in a pre-qualification questionnaire, you had to go and get £1 million worth of indemnity insurance, you had to prove that you had done over £200 million worth of business, you had to prove that you'd been around for 3 years. I mean, none of these applied to the companies that we were then starting to want to talk to. And I remember a meeting, we did a series of meetings in San Francisco with our then minister, Francis Maud, who we took out to go and meet new companies. And none of the companies that we were dealing with at the time met those criteria. And yet those companies were Joyent, Cloudera, Twilio. These were good, solid companies that we'd like to come and work with us, and we couldn't work with them because our rules said we couldn't. And yet they were massively backed, venture funds, credible companies. And then go and look at what we were trying to do with British companies that were trying to get going and trying to get moving. Our rules precluded it. So we created the GCloud. It's now called the Digital Marketplace. And the fundamental change in design of what we did was we designed our framework and our procurement service around our users. And our users were the buyers, the sellers, and the accountants. So we wanted to make sure that we had things which made it simple for a civil servant to go and buy the services they wanted to buy by making the language clear, the conditions flexible, and the ability for people to make their solutions from different components possible. We then went to the sellers and started talking to those companies about what their problems were, and most of their problems were that the contracts we wrote and the terms we put on the site were just not in English. And just writing them in English made an enormous difference because the ambiguities and the problems that people have just disappeared because we were being clear about what we did. And this was also driven by a culture of total transparency, that we would publish every sale that we recorded, who it went to, how much it was for, so that people who were starting a business could show that they had sold to government and could link back and say, if you don't believe that I'm selling to the British government, here's the webpage, this shows you how much I'm selling to them, which gives people credibility, and small businesses, it means they can grow. And very interestingly, we found that we were selling about half, so it says on here 52. In December, the last figure I got details for, it was 56% went to small businesses by value. And our run rate is now about 105 to 120 million pounds a month. And 56% of that is small businesses. The main thing with that is that the companies that come in that we were really impressed with as well were the large businesses that would come in and sell as a small business. And would come to us with the same things and say, look, why am I signing this contract? It doesn't make any sense for me to lose the money to do the bid. Let me come in and work with you and get services to you effectively, cheaply, without a barrier to entry for me selling. And so, AWS have been one of those companies. IBM was one of those companies that sold an enormous amount just by behaving like a small business, behaving like a value-conscious business. And that's been the big success of this, is that we've started to offer a marketplace where people can sell and want to sell, and we've removed the friction that old-time, long-time procurement delivers. And it means now that we are creating jobs, and we are creating sales, and we are using innovation, but also our IT is massively cheaper, because we embrace the idea of flexibility. And so if you're running a procurement department or if you've got a procurement department, in a way, the best thing I can offer you is, look, this is possible. We've got a whole country's central government running on it now. 67% of all the sales on the GCloud is central government. Sorry, 73%. The rest are public sector. We've got a long way to go within our public sector, but that's the cultural side now. That's helping people understand that they can buy things more effectively, more simply, more easily. But the big thing and the big sell to any public sector organization is look at the jobs this creates, look at the economic growth, and look at the innovation you'll be building to help your services run more smoothly, more effectively. Now, one last point is that I work for the British government. We're very keen on doing things in the United Kingdom. We have no writ to do anything outside the United Kingdom. We all do the same things as governments, but the one thing governments don't do is compete. And public sector organizations don't compete because most of them have a monopoly play in their field. So this is all open to you to steal. This is all open for you to take away if you would like. We're very clear about our tech code of practice. We're very clear about how we made the GCloud work. We're very open about how it works and what's there. There's a very, very clear blog and a team of people who are fundamentally committed to helping others and will share information with you. And we may not have done this right. We think it works, but we think it works okay. There will be innovation and change that you would see that you should bring to it. So please go and have a look at the digital marketplace, is what it's called now. It's on the GovUK blog. Go and have a look, see what's there. Come and tell us what you would like to see in it, but also come and tell us what you would do differently, but also steal the idea. One of the things that every single time I've done something in the public sector and I've gone to a politician, and I'm sorry, I used to be a politician myself, is the first answer is, who's done this somewhere else? Okay? Well, we've done it. And we've documented it and we've shown how to do it. So that gets you over the first hurdle. And I hope you can take your view on how to make public procurement effective, sensible, clear, easy to do, but most of all, use public procurement to build your industries and your local business. Thanks very much. I'm open to questions. So here's the awful side. Oh, we have got a question. Excellent. Shout. Yeah, there's a standard agreement for each people to join the framework, but then each player sets their own terms within a framework of terms. So you can set your own pricing, you can set your own terms within it. So it's very, very flexible for people to join. The one thing we did learn as we were putting this together was there's an enormous amount of selling to the businesses, for us to the businesses to get them on in the first place. Because for a lot of people, they will go on, there won't be a sale for a year, there won't be a sale for 6 months. And so that initial cost is, people find quite difficult to justify, but we've seen that people have generated it and it has come over. But that flexibility to generate some of your terms the same is good. There are common terms. One of the things that, and Max is here at the front will tell you, there's a continual aim to try and get those terms to be more business friendly. They're not perfect. And we will always try and make them work more effectively for our vendors, but also for our customers. Hi.
Thanks, Mr. Maxwell, for your story. Actually, I'd love to exchange coordinates. I'm Canadian government. We both a lot of what you're doing, and I think it's phenomenal.
I'm seeing Scott Bryson on Thursday.
But actually, my first question is for Mr. Durant. Sure. We've gone through a year-long process trying to get to an RFP, and as Dave here will tell you, we should close this Friday. But one of the issues we have is the marketplace.
Okay.
And, you know, I think the issues around it is it's full of commercial terms and conditions to which...
For each individual software that's on there, and just for anybody who's not aware of marketplaces, it's 2,000 pieces of software and couple hundred categories right now that people can actually buy and download very quickly. So I just want to make sure it was clear to everybody.
Traditional kind of clickware type product that you get into, and one of the things we want to do is buy cloud the way the market sells it, so that our users get the kind of same experience they would if they just put a credit card in. So they want the marketplace there. The issue is it's full of commercial terms and conditions to which we have to accept, and our lawyer's saying that's entering into a contract. Is there something you can do to help governments buy the marketplace without necessarily having to do what the UK did, which is enter into agreements with each of those providers, although it looks like that's where we might have to go. So is there an opportunity to maybe harmonize those? I know the GSA did some work where they looked at commercial terms and conditions, said there's 15 things in there that we don't like. Indemnification, for example, a private company representing a government won't work. So just some of those kind of things, like we're willing to change our policies and take more risks and try to meet you halfway, but is there something that companies can do to try to harmonize and make that more accessible, or is our only real option to do what the UK's done and move to a framework and sign individual agreements with all?
Okay, well, I'm not going to say I'm an expert at the marketplace terms and conditions, and I know, Max, we've done a little bit of work in the UK on this, and there's some areas in the US government that we've actually done this for too. So first, we can probably talk to some people who've gotten a little deeper into it and have had some success around it. I think ultimately you have these different vendors, and they're going to have their own terms and conditions around this. I don't think we're never going to get away from that completely. Now, I think it's in everybody's interest to streamline that, though, to make it as simple as possible. Our side, the software providers, they want to make it as easy as possible, and for you. So what I can say, I'm happy to talk afterward, but we can sit down and have a conversation. We can also talk to some of the folks here in the government, US government, where we've actually done some things with the marketplace for an individual customer and how we did that. So I don't know, Max, did you have any comments, or did you have any comments on marketplace?
Not at this point.
Okay, Max,
I would just, I think it's a great question, because that's one of the fundamental things that we do need to figure out how to change. And Liam was talking about what's the cultural change, right? So if you want innovation and speed, you need to enable people to be able to buy, like commercial businesses are buying today. The answer for GCloud is that the AWS marketplace is used as the way to launch all these different software offerings. The provider needs to have their software terms and conditions on GCloud. And that was the very practical way that these are harmonized. The other example that David talked about is where at a whole of government level, an agency, in this case it was the U.S. National Security Agency, contracted for a private marketplace for themselves. And so in that model, the customer who had a big volume of users effectively harmonized it by saying, hey, we'll buy a marketplace and then we'll load it with all the providers that we want.
I appreciate they have the scale to do that, but we're trying to stick to buying what the market provides, and it seems like going back to trying to tailor something for us was exactly what everyone just said not to do. So I guess, how do we work in that paradigm to get to success, I guess? So you don't have to answer it now, but I think it's something I'd like to leave to go forward, because we're going to be doing more of this, and we can figure out how to meet each other halfway. I think it would be great for the users, and it'd be great for, the more people launch, the more of your infrastructure they're using, so it's a payoff.
And I think, I look at marketplace as one of our great the attributes that AWS brings, and it is sort of an untapped attribute in the government space right now. So I think, as Max said, it is a challenge that we all need to work to figure out. And I'd love to sit down, because that's the best way to solve this, rather than waiting for an RFP to have that discussion. So.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is the best way of solving these things is to sit down and have the really open conversation. And so much of the time we discovered that vendors, even for very large companies, were scared of telling us that our rules were bonkers. And because it had always been this thing, if I tell people that everything's wrong, they're not going to buy from me again. And once you get through that, you're into a better place.
No one on the sales side will tell you that the government's wrong.
I've got to say,
that's part of my job, is to come in and do that conversation sometimes, is to sit down and have those. Well, he's a sales guy, so.
Yeah. Any other questions? Do we have?
There were some other hands raised.
Yeah.
Who? No. Anybody else have a question? All right, go ahead.
Actually, Mr. Maxwell, did I catch your name right?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you deal with the fact that you've got a framework agreement, basically a catalog of services, and then you're leaving it to users to select the right service?
Yep.
You know, I've read different things, different articles about companies get better or worse sales in terms of what they put in their entries because the government's kind of hits certain things in their search. But
Yep.
how do you justify the fairness? Do you get into issues where companies are saying, well, you know, I'm losing out to company A or B, and I think that it's rigged? Because the people on the side are...
Transparency.
Exactly.
Transparency is what it is. So in all aspects of public life, one of the things that the simplest way of making sure you don't get into a hypothetical argument is to use cases. And the best way of using cases is to make sure everything is transparent. So in my political past, I was the person that made all local government spending over £500 go onto the internet. You know, we made that happen. We made it an open, transparent approach to spending. And at that point, you've got the evidence that can show whether that is happening or that isn't. One of the things that we do find, and we still find, is small businesses find it very difficult to get going. And we have a mystery shopper service, which helps us in that space, which is where we will then go and work as an investigator to find out what the barriers are for people coming through. I mean, we were talking earlier with Drew's the audience here from Cloud Guru. One of the things we were talking about earlier was that, you know, in the first stages of this, the thing that you need to have it work is someone who just goes and listens and then goes and kicks in doors and gets the blockers out of the way. But lots of those blockers are quite hidden to us when you look at it systemically. And as a civil servant, it's quite hidden. And if you're a large company, they're quite hidden. But for a small business, it's really evident why you're not getting going. So the mystery shopper service helps. But total transparency is what works in this space because it means you can see whether something is working or it isn't.
One other thing I'll add to what I found the more successful governments have done is allowing experimentation and trying and failing as they go forward. One government we worked with in the Middle East actually said, let's just submit a proposal into the system. Really minor little deal, and let's see what breaks. And let's see where the problems that came up. And it was a really fascinating set of exercises to see where legal came in and had an issue. Okay, let's talk that through, where this came through. And experimenting and trying rather than trying to solve it all at once up front without having that back and forth. It actually sped the process up quite a bit.
As we built digital, I mean, the digital marketplace is a digital service that the government offers. And one of the things that we made sure that all digital services had to do before they went from beta to live is, one, you have to turn the old things off, fair enough. The other one is that the minister responsible for that service has to complete the transaction. And so one of the things that we did before GCloud went live was we took it, I remember in the very early days, we took it to Francis and said, you now need to go through and buy something. And I have to be honest, he gave very, very clear feedback about what he didn't like, and it didn't go live. Because, you know, he was saying, well, I wouldn't want to do that. That's not it. And that's really important that you get your politicians, who are the ultimate stakeholders, or your chief executives if you're running a public sector body, they have to go and use the service. Because ultimately, it's their service. They're selling it. It's their responsibility. And so that's one of the simplest ways of doing that and making sure that you're getting something which is fair, is open, but actually works. Any other questions?
Good. Any other questions?
Okay, we're wrapping up.
I think we're at time, so
there we
appreciate
go,
it.
we're at
Thank you very
time.
much. Thank you,
very much
Liam, for
indeed.
coming in.